Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Renu Tyagi from Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. Today I am going to talk about the module Nature and Culture, Contemporary Approach. The learning objective of these modules are: number 1, the course provides contemporary approach information about nature and culture in the field of ecological anthropology. It includes the human ecology, cultural ecology and development of a notion of culture. The study of this module enables the students at postgraduate level to understand the evolutionary concept related to synthesis of culture and nature in ecological anthropology. First of all, I will introduce you with the concept of nature and culture. In the 21st century, the relationship between the concept of nature and culture has undergone significant change or even questioning or reversal in values which are fairly representative of the general state of contemporary thinking. In fact, traditionally, relations between nature and culture have been characterized by differences or even oppositions between the two concepts. At one level, what has traditionally characterized culture and distinguished it from nature has been artifice, custom and convention. Culture is a human institution and as such it reflects the exercise of will or at least a set of intended meanings. Culture is a world where rule and values operate. These, however, relate to human action and are, so as to speak, victim of its inconstancy. Culture is also the domain of diversity, of belief, of inconsistency, of passions, even of contradiction in human decisions. Nature, on the other hand, presents itself as a reality characterized by permanence, stability, regularity. The recurrence of seasons and blooming, the constancy of living forms, but also of the material world, cause nature to be a kind of guarantee of the substantiality of being. The fact that things have a nature gives them a sort of solidity on which humanity can rely in its action and its enterprises in the 4 or 5 million years since their development. Humans have colonized virtually every terrestrial environment of the planet. Humans everywhere are virtually the same biologically in spite of visible but superficial differences, but have been able to adapt to the enormous environmental diversity of the planet through culture, an incredibly flexible and adaptive mechanism that other animals lack. Thus, humans have been a very successful species. Human activity has a wide range of impact on the environment. However, from exceedingly minor to catastrophic, today, human activities are having huge impact on the very environment on which we depend, ultimately threatening our own existence. Understanding and dealing with these challenges is a daunting but essential task. Anthropology, including cultural ecology, differ from other fields in that it studies all humans everywhere from the earliest times, that is millions of years ago, to today, and from the Arctic to Antarctic. No group is so small that it is not important, and no period of history or prehistory is without interest. This wide approach has allowed anthropologists to disprove many generalizations based only on modern or Western societies and to demonstrate some other generalization that were not obvious ones, such as the universality of the complex kinship system and dietary rules. People in Western societies tend to hold the view that humans are separate from environment above it in some way. This can be traced back to the Bible. In Genesis number 1, the world, the environment was first created and then man, an entity separate and superior to the nature, was created and given the task of subduing nature. Genesis argues otherwise for stewardship, but Western philosophy continues to include the view that it is the goal and mission of people to conquer nature. Thus, many people today continue to believe that humans are not participants in the environment, but that we must overcome it and bend it to our own will. This conviction continues to permeate Western thought and action as we have strived to separate ourselves from our natural surroundings by artificially creating closed environments, including our home, offices and cars. Ironically, some mostly corporates and government people have conveniently shifted their view on this matter, arguing now that human activity is part of nature and so change in climate caused by humans. For example, global warming is natural and thus not of concern. One could argue that many traditional societies do not hold the view that people are separate from nature and that they are somehow ecologists living in harmony with their environment. It is true that the activities of many societies have less impact on the environment than others, and it is also true that some of these groups hold a more ecologically friendly philosophy of life than Westerners generally do. It has also been argued, however, that traditional societies often make less of an impact on environment only because their technology is less complex and their populations smaller. Given the right condition and incentives, the argument goes they would do as Westerners do. In support of this argument, one can point to the destruction of habitat on Easter Island. The deforestation of most of the Europe during the Neolithic and the worst degradation of the northern island, among other examples. Fortunately, local traditional people can be trusted to take care of their resources, not out of fuzzy-minded love for Mother Earth, but out of solid, hard-headed good sense, often shored up by traditional religion and morality. Biologists are beginning to realize this. Kent Redford, who coined the sarcastic term the ecological noble savage, has since repented and now takes a more balanced position. We now recognize that human and their cultures are an integral part of environment. Human activity affects the environment, which is then altered, in turn affecting human activities. The shape and form of the environment is dependent on its history, a history that includes humans. Yet it is also important to realize that humans are not just another animal. Humans are self-aware, cooperative, technological and highly social. This unique combination does separate humans from other organisms, making their interactions with the environment more complex and fascinating. Now we will discuss the human ecology. Human ecology is the study of the interaction of human with their environment, or the study of the distribution and abundance of humans. This definition is based directly on conventional definition of biological ecology. Ecology is usually defined as the study of interaction of organisms with their environment and each other. More pointedly, it can be defined as the study of the distribution and abundance of organisms. This definition is deceptive, implies much more than it says explicitly, because virtually everything that humans are or do, and the same goes for any species, affects their distribution and abundance. Thus, using the term human ecology actually expresses a broad ambition to understand human behavior. Human ecology is an approach to the study of human behavior marked by two commitments. First, human ecologists think that humans should be studied as living systems operating in complex environment. The human sciences are balkanized into several social sciences, humanistic and human biological disciplines. Ecologists are used to thinking that systematic nature of individual organisms and populations of organisms means that we typically have to understand how diverse parts of system operate together to produce behavior. The traditional human science discipline take people apart. Human ecologists endeavor to put us back together. Breaking complex problems down to operationally tractable carts is a great strategy, but only so long as some are committed to putting them back together in the end. Second, human ecologists think that humans are subject to very similar ecological and evolutionary processes as any other species. Of course, humans are unique and this fact has important consequences. However, we think that the deep rifts between human biologists and social scientists, and between scientists and humanists for that matter, are deeply embarrassing scandal that honest scholars are obligated to repair as expeditiously as possible. Now let us discuss the nature and culture concept. At the foundation of cultural anthropology lies the notion of great fault line sundering the world of human culture from the rest of the living world. On this view, part of our human constitution falls on one side of the line, the side explicable by biological and allied sciences. On that side, we resemble other animals, but on the other side, dominated by our capacity for learning language and the use of symbols. We reach beyond the knowledge of biology and attain our essential, unique and, so to speak, super animal character. In his presidential address to the American Association for Advancement of Sciences in 1958, Leslie White captured this doctrine in a memorable myth. Using symbols, men built a new world in which to live. He still trod the earth, felt the wind against his cheek or heard it sigh among the pines. He slept beneath the stars and awoke to greet the sun. But it was not the same sun. Everything was bathed in celestial light, and there were intimations of immortality on every hand. Between men and nature hung the wheel of culture, and he could see nothing save through this medium. Permeating everything was the essence of words, the meaning and values that lay beyond the senses. The imagery of this just so story dividing humans from animals is fanciful, but the message is sincerely intended. Human cognition and actions are mediated by learned and therefore cultural rather than by instinctive or inborn responses. Since this is so, culture is a separate object of study. Cultural variation is different in kind from biological variation, and cultural anthropology is an autonomous discipline separate from the biological sciences. Culture is the core concept in anthropology. Specialists of all the branches of anthropology use it in various ways. The only problem with this concept is that there is little agreement about how to define the term. The scientific use of the term corresponds to the original meaning of culture, which is derived from the Latin word collator, to cultivate and instruct, and cultus, which means cultivation and training. In its broadest sense, culture is cultivated behavior, that is, men's learned and socially transmitted behavior. This is the general anthropological meaning of the term. However, anthropologists have operationalized the concept of culture in more than one ways. Kroeber and Kluckern have uncovered over 160 definitions of the term. A few representative views are discussed. That complex whole, which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by men as member of society, is called culture as per the definition given by Tyler in 1871. All the historically created design for living, explicit and implicit, rational or irrational and non-rational, which exist at any given time as potential guides for the behavior of the men, is the definition of culture given by Kluckern and Kelly. The mass of learned and transmitted motor reaction, habits, technique and ideas and valued the behavior then induced is the definition of Kroeber. According to Herskowitz, the culture is the man-made part of the environment. Culture consists of standards for deciding what is, what can be, how one can feel about it, what to do about it, and how to go about doing it according to the good enough. Now let us see what is cultural ecology. The cultural ecology theory considers how environmental forces influenced human and how human activities affects the biosphere and the earth itself. The study of the environment's effect on humans was especially prevalent in 1960s and 1970s when Julian Stewart founded the anthropological theory of cultural ecology. Stewart in 1955 defined cultural ecology in his book The Theory of Cultural Change as a heuristic device for understanding the effect of environment upon culture. Nevertheless, the development of a notion of culture from the beginning has been derived hard from behind by the intellectual struggle against attempt to explain human behavior and human variety using purely natural scientific means. It is therefore impossible to understand the concept culture clearly without reference to its opposing concept, nature. Nature is a wider perspective. This struggle is out a fragment of the greater conflict over human nature, which has been so pervasive a feature of intellectual life in the North Atlantic societies of 19th and 20th centuries. For as the assurance of the natural sciences grew and as more of living world fell under their confident surveillance, so a conception of nature began to grow that was to be subject to an increasingly authoritative style of inquiry, which we know today as biology. The burning question then became, to what extent do humans fall into nature and therefore under the sovereignty of biological explanation. For some, and this is as true today as it was in the last century, the sway of such explanation was to be total. For others, in sociology and related disciplines, however, humans and human society participate in a different order of existence altogether. In the province of intellectual endeavor that became anthropology, the province concerned with human diversity, the struggle for a distinct science of humanity was led by Franz Boas in United States. To Boas, we owe the creation of both the cultural anthropological attitude and the very profession of cultural anthropology itself. When he began work in 1980s, Boas found in place a theory hardly 50 years old, but already very elaborate, which purported to explain the different varieties of people, their customs and their apparently different mental capacities by reference to race. The race theory was firmly anchored in the new science of biology by evolutionary ideas, which suggested that some races were more primitive than the others and therefore more animal-like or theromorphic in bodily form, mental ability and moral development. The theory measured each race against the supposedly most advanced, the Northern Europeans. Boas broke the evidently seamless simplicity of this theory. He showed that bodily form is not linked to language or to any of the matter we associate with culture, attitudes and values, custom, models of the livelihood and form of social organization. He argued that there is no reason to think that other races or more accurately other ways of life are less moral or less intelligent than the Northern Europeans, and so there is no single standard for evaluation. Moreover, by his own strenuous example, he showed that different culture could and should be the object of intensive field research, which would reveal forms and patterns in human life that were hitherto unsuspected. These patterns are so various, he argued, that they could not have arisen from a uniform process of social or cultural evolution, but must rather be the fruit of complex local historical causes. These ideas were set out in Boas' The Mind of Primitive Men in 1911, but they were elaborated in the next generation by Boas' large and brilliant group students, which included Edward Sapir, Alfred Kroeber, Margaret Mead and Ruth Benedict, and by their students in turn. On this view, human culture is marked by its extreme plasticity, such that human beings possessing everywhere much the same biological heritage are nevertheless able to sustain kaleidoscopically differing sets of values, institutions and behaviors in different cultures. Yet, if culture seems to this extent arbitrary in its variety, its possession is central to the human constitution, for without culture, without some learned collection of language and habits of thought and action, human being could most literally not live. These ideas were well in place by the publication of Benedict Pattern of Culture. To achieve Leslie White's Just So story of 1958, only a slight extra stress was needed to the effect that humans are symboling and classifying creatures who possess meaning. These ideas were hugely successful. They became the pons asinorum, the bridge separating those who understand anthropology from those who do not, and they serve even today as the entry to what grew into a vast professional academic discipline in United States. Now we will discuss culture and nature and the synthesis of culture and nature. The Boasian doctrine expanded and changed as well. Along one line of development, nature culture became for anthropologists who now studied culture alone an unexamined or even dogmatic presumptions and unquestioned feature of reality. Hence, the distinction came to be applied just like any such general and governing idea as a conceptual Swiss army knife useful for many purposes beyond its designer plan. The French anthropologist Lévi-Strauss is perhaps the most influential representative of this term. He argued that the nature-culture divide is not just an anthropologist concept but is to be found among all societies in some form as a cognitive device for understanding the world. Indeed, he went further, suggesting that it is the very making of a distinction between nature and culture that distinguishes human from animals. Few have been willing to follow him around so many corners, and he later scaled down his claim about the universality of distinction, but his examples has given warrant to the use of nature versus culture as an interpretive device throughout anthropology. Some writers, for example, have suggested that the divide falls between men and women, such that women or perhaps the process of childbirth are natural, whereas men or the ritual and political processes they control are cultural. The nature-culture divide is often used to great and illuminating effect, but it is worth remembering that the very concept is a product of and is used by only a small segment of the societies of the North Atlantic rim in the 20th century, and so may not enjoy the universal explanatory penetration that is sometimes claimed for it. One of the other alternative was to accept a notion of culture, but to turn back to the scientific styles of explanation to give an account of it. The rise to prominence of the biological field of ecology after World War II stimulated some anthropologists to look for a new material logic underpinning cultural forms. The most famous and least persuasive example is Marvin Harris' attempt to explain the worship of cattle in India by reference to the usefulness of cow dung to Indian farmers. A more plausible example is Roy Rapport's painstaking attempt to explain the religion of Papua New Guinea people by their ecology and mode of livelihood. The force of such arguments often lies not so much in themselves as in their demonstration of weaknesses in Boasian inheritance, which often glosses over complexities in social and material life that are not amenable to traditional cultural explanation. In any case, the vigor and anger of the replies to such argument reveal how fervently many anthropologists cling to the autonomy of culture. Indeed, the temperature of continuing conflict between the parties of biological and cultural determinism remains high. This conflict has ranged in 20th century across race, sexuality, gender, aggression, intelligence, nutrition, and many more issues besides. It may seem merely antiquarian to stress the importance of BOAS until we realize that the research project on adolescent sexuality in Samoa proposed by him for Margaret Mead, a project which then seemed to demonstrate decisively the force of cultural over biological explanation, was challenged fiercely in 1980s in the name of new form of biological explanation. On the one hand, the notion of nature culture has worked its way into conceptual vocabularies across the learned disciplines of North Atlantic societies and into the thought of psychologists, ethnologists and even our evolutionary biologist. Even British social anthropology, which for so long resisted the concept of culture, has silently accepted its importance. Yet on the other hand, the disciplinary dispute continue because the biological sciences have very different schemes of training and very different aspirations than the cultural disciplines. And if anthropologists have grown in number and confidence, so have biologists. The biologist in 19th century claim for decisive authority has only been magnified by a growth in professionalization and the accomplishments and a fabulous growth in the authority and the funding of biological sciences in 20th century. In the mutual understanding of the two parties, it is often difficult to judge who are the more ignorant of the other and the more arrogant. Now, let us see the synthesis of culture and nature. Yet the late 20th century has seen the beginning of an extraordinary cooperative effort by behavioral biologists, psychologists and anthropologists, not so much to reconcile the discipline as to channel their conflicting energies into a greater projects. Suppose for a moment that we look into two parties, each to have revealed a broken fragment of the truth. Humans do vary greatly in their cultural endowment and those endowments bear heavily on their behavior, yet humans, like other animals, came into being through the forces best described as Darwinian. It follows then that human evolved to have culture, so to speak. Our big brains with their ability to manipulate symbols along with our abilities to use our respiratory tract for speech comprise the Darwinian heritage that makes us the culture bearing animal par excellence. This much might be admitted by even a very reductionist biologist or very doctrine cultural anthropologist. What is only now coming to light, however, is a subtler picture which shows that we have evolved not in the first instance as culture bearing animals, but as social animals. Studies of childhood, cognitive and emotional development and comparative studies other primates show that beneath and around the stuff of culture there stands a scaffolding of social abilities and distinctly social intelligence. We can learn culture because we came richly equipped even as the smallest infant to enter into conscious and responsive social relation with our fellows. We become culturally knowledgeable because we first became socially knowledgeable, able to grasp and react to the moods and intentions of those around us in a way recognizably akin to but a good deal more powerful than that of our primate cousins. And because this scaffolding intelligence is both relatively powerful and flexible, because in other words it is a creative and imaginative intelligence, we can begin to see how humans have quite naturally been so productive of a rich panoply of differing cultures across the world. Now let's summarize what we have learnt so far in this module. In the 21st century, the relationship between the concept of nature and culture has undergone significant changes or even questioning or reversal in values which are fairly representative of the general state of contemporary thinking. We have understood that culture is a human institution, and as such it reflects the exercise of will or at least a set of intended meanings. Culture is a world where rules and values operate. Nature presents itself as reality characterized by permanence, stability, regularity. Today, human activities are having huge impact on the very environment on which we depend, ultimately threatening our own existence. Anthropology, including cultural ecology, differs from other fields in that it studies all human everywhere from the earliest time, that is millions of years ago, to today, and from the Arctic to Antarctic. Human ecology is the study of the interaction of humans with their environment. Human ecology actually expresses a broad ambition to understand human behavior. At the foundation of cultural anthropology lies the notion of great fault line sundering the world of human culture from the rest of the living world. Culture is the core concept in anthropology. Culture is derived from the Latin word coiter, to cultivate and instruct, and cultus, that is cultivation and training. The cultural ecologist theory considers how environmental forces influenced human and how human activities affects the biosphere and the earth itself. Nevertheless, the development of a notion of culture has from the beginning been driven hard from behind by the intellectual struggle against attempt to explain human behavior and human variety using purely natural scientific means. The French anthropologist Lévi-Strauss is perhaps the most influential representative of culture and nature turn. The nature-culture divide is often used to great and illuminating effect. Even British social anthropologists, which so far being resisting the concept of culture, have silently accepted its importance. We can learn culture because we come richly equipped even as the smallest infant to enter into conscious and responsive social relation with our fellows. Thank you.